Right, we're joined now by Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. Frank, thanks for being with us. Frank, let's focus on the story about that foiled terrorist plot. The French have now concluded their own investigation, saying it is the Iranian intelligence ministry that was behind the plot. Do you see this revelation impacting the French commitment to the Iran nuclear deal in any way?
Well, one would hope so. But after all, the fact that the Iranians have as their object, ultimately, being able to destroy France ought to have concentrated the minds of the French before now. That's the purpose of their ballistic missile and nuclear weapons programs, is to be able to threaten Europe, not just France, of course, but and not certainly Europe alone, but Israel and the United States as well. These are the sorts of things that ought to, before now, have caused the French to rethink, in particular, the folly of trying to persuade their companies to defy American sanctions and continue propping up this horrific regime in Tehran that threatens not only its own people, but the French and, as I say, so many others as well.
Yeah, you would think so. And Frank, Netanyahu was making the point in his speech that the Europeans continue to fund this regime, which is trying to launch attacks on European soil, as well as, of course, in the Middle East, and that all the funds from the deal have gone towards enforcing Iran's aggression, both in the region and beyond. Does that aspect, that Iran is clearly funding violence and terror, even in Europe, does it sway at all the Europeans in any way that this now could come back on their own home front?
Well, as I say, we haven't seen much evidence of it, if there is such a rethinking. Angela Merkel, of course, is going to be in Israel this week, and the government of Bibi Netanyahu will, I'm sure, be asking her precisely that question in the course of it. But so far, she most especially, but the French as well, the Brits even, have maintained this crazy idea that if only they perpetuate the so-called joint comprehensive plan of action, I call it the Obama bomb deal, they will somehow moderate the Iranian behavior. And I can't say for certain that every dime of the roughly, what is it, $150 billion that the United States foolishly allowed to be transferred back to the Iranian regime has gone into terrorism and efforts to subvert, their adversaries in the region, and to build ballistic missiles and to acquire nuclear weapons. But I'm pretty sure it's all gone there, or to the pockets and bank accounts of those who are involved. This is a scandal of the first order, and it seems to me that it's high time that, as is being done by a number of the companies in Europe, which have made the correct calculation that they'd rather do business with the United States than be essentially precluded from doing so, the governments of Europe ought to be arriving at the same conclusion. Not, of course, doing business, but being on the same side as the United States, as on Israel, as on, the free world, for heaven's sakes. And they're not at the moment.
Well, Frank, they're actually trying to even thwart the U.S. sanctions. They're not only not participating in the deal, but now they've set up a special purpose vehicle, a joint mechanism that allows companies to try and bypass the U.S. sanctions when doing business with Iran. Do you see that potentially as working?
I don't think it will, but again, ultimately, they're making a decision that they're going to be excluded from the U.S. market. And I think most of the companies, certainly most of the big European companies, have calculated that that doesn't make good business sense for them. But, let's face it, some of these companies are probably deciding that they want to do what their governments are encouraging them to do. And you're right. The governments are responsible for trying to circumvent the sanctions. They're working with the Russians. They're working with the Chinese to do this. I don't have any clue, really, as to why they think their interests are going to be best served by this kind of appeasement. Let's be honest.
Yeah,
that's what it comes down to, of a regime that is unappeasable.
That is the key word, and as we know, as history has taught us, Frank, appeasement doesn't really work out too well for Europe. Now, does it? Very quickly, what do you make of this rebuttal by the International Atomic Energy Agency that it's not going to take Netanyahu's claims of an Iranian nuclear site at face value and is not going to inspect?
Yeah, it's just the latest indication of how completely irrelevant and frankly malfeasant that organization is. The International Atomic Energy Agency is a politicized entity that in the craziness of this Obama bond deal was entrusted the responsibility of figuring out whether the Iranians were compliant with it, and they insist that it is. But that's based on not looking at the evidence of problems. For example, not being able or even asking to go places other than the places that the Iranians have said they could come to. It's foolishness, and it's misleading, and it's dangerous.
Frank, we're going to have to leave it there. Frank Gaffney, thank you for the time. We'll be right back.